Hi, welcome to the Dan Bradbury podcast, where turnover is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is king. In this podcast, I'll bring you resources, tips, interviews, and lots more to help to grow your business and make it less dependent on you.
Hi, welcome to the Dan Bradbury podcast. I'm Topher Morrison. I'll be guest hosting for the next several episodes as Dan is currently right now busy creating thousands of fake Twitter accounts to lower its stock value so his friend Elon can get a much better deal. I'm sorry, I'm being told that's not true. Dan only has one Twitter account and Elon does not know him. So in that case, what he's actually doing is prepping for his Success Mastermind coming up June 21st and 22nd, where we are going to be hosting the Ultimate Entrepreneur Competition, second annual one, by the way, where 8 lucky business owners, or I should say hard-working business owners that have earned the right to compete, are going to be competing for a cash prize of £10,000 and the title of Ultimate Entrepreneur. Our guest today on the podcast is one of those contestants. His name is Alexis Kingsbury. He is the founder of SpiderGap, which is a software to create 360-degree feedback for your employees and your teams. And he's also the founder of a new venture called Air Manual. We're going to be talking about that today because today's theme is all about corporate culture and how do you develop consciously a culture which is empowering and allows people to want to stick around and last. So you're going to love that. So without further ado, please welcome to the podcast, Alexis Kingsbury. Alexis, welcome to the Dan Bradbury podcast. It's good to see you again. This is our second interview. We had one last year. You were a finalist in last year's Ultimate Entrepreneur Competition. You're coming back again with a vengeance. You're like Rocky that trained up in Russia in the snow. You're more committed now. You've been drinking raw egg whites. You're in it to win it. Tell me a little bit about. By the way, I should probably do more of a formal introduction, even though I've already done it previously. But Alexis Kingsbury from SpiderGap. Now, let me ask you this. You've made a lot of changes over this past year. SpiderGap is how I know you. I know you by having the world's best 360-degree feedback tool for people that are looking for really cool ways to integrate group culture feedback. But you've also, in fact, last year at this time, I think you were really starting to build out Air Manual. So it's been a year on now. What's going on? Do you call yourself SpiderGap, or have you evolved to a bigger, better name, or what are you doing?
Yeah, great. So so it's been a really interesting year. So yes, we still have SpiderGap, and SpiderGap has continued to grow over the last year, which is fantastic. In fact, one of the things that's been amazing has been almost partly because I've been forced by working on this new venture, working on Air Manual. I've had to go even further to empower my team over at SpiderGap, including sort of coaching the executive team, even getting to the point of in essentially setting up a COO, my kind of managing director kind of
Very
person
cool.
who's responsible for both kind of managing the day-to-day, but even managing exec level issues and what our objectives and key results are for the quarter and helping make sure they're delivered. And what's really nice, by the way, is not only has it freed up my time, but they are way better at it than I am. So
A little humbling when it works better without you than it works with you. But it's a blessing, right?
Absolutely.
By the way, this interview could probably take hours because first off, I'm fascinated by you. I think the world of you. I think you're cool. And I remember specific things even from the Ultimate Entrepreneur last year that I want to talk to you about today. But I really want today's theme to kind of be revolving around culture. And you just alluded to that a little bit as well, right? Like you're having cultural growth pains as well by bringing on a COO, and how do you transfer that responsibility over that? I think that's be a really cool message for the listeners and the viewers of this podcast to really talk about, like, how do you handle those growth pains and what have you learned? Like, what were the biggest mistakes you've made from kind of handing the reins over to a COO, because it's such a fine line between delegation and abdication. And it's easy to just go, it's you now, right? So what are some of those lessons that you've been getting over this past year from your growth pains?
Yeah, sure. So I'd say This time round, I guess I've been fortunate from learning from the scars of previous mistakes. So I've done it better this time round, as you might hope. But I remember, quite a few years ago when we first started hiring, we did an absolutely appalling job of creating the culture within the organization and embedding it and scaling it as we grew. Particularly, I remember in the early days, we didn't even tell people what our values are. We hadn't got them written down. It was, whether you've written them down or not, there are values in your organization. And of course,
they're present, they're there.
Exactly. Yep. And the culture within your organization will be built on that foundation, whether or not it's a good foundation that you're conscious of, or whether it's a shaky one that you've created by accident. A good example
which is probably the case for most business owners, because it's one of those things that they know it's really important. They've got to focus on it, just not today.
Yeah, indeed.
We'll get to that next week, next quarter. We're gonna hammer down on that, and before you know it, 2 years in, the culture's already established, but it wasn't done within. By the way, was just kind of backtracking here, was that part of the inspiration behind Air Manual as well, in that you were making some of those mistakes? And we should probably also talk about what Air Manual is, since we're having a conversation like everybody might know. But was that one of your inspirations behind developing that software?
Yes, it was. So if I explain the context of that, and then it will become clear kind of what Air Manual is and why we created it. So one of the big takeaways I took from sort of early building the team and trying to build the culture is that it is best to write it down. You do want to just, because otherwise you explain it different every single time. So you do want to write it down. But you also want to make sure that you can change it and evolve it over time, because if you're not embarrassed by some of the stuff you did a year, 2 years, 3 years ago, you're not learning and developing fast enough. So you want the ability to change it. But then every time that someone's coming into your organization, they need to go through some kind of onboarding process to learn those things, to understand the journey, to understand your values and what that means, and see examples and reflect on that, and then discuss that with the manager to really make sure it's gone in. And then all of the other things that they need to learn about the business and how you work, and the processes and all those sorts of things, how they're supported. That should be organized and made clear to them, so that they don't feel like they're coming to an organization that's an absolute mess and isn't, it isn't clear on how they're going to welcome and support their team members. And so we used a variety of,
regardless if it is a mess, right?
Yeah, even if it is.
I want to stop you for a second, because you just said something that kind of hit me, and I was like, ouch. Because I'm really good with standard operating procedures. We've got our values listed. We have a welcome thing. We use a system called Trainual, and I want to talk to you a little bit about how you compare to Trainual as well, because I've been a fan of it for years. I was one of their early adopters. So I'm really big on this, right? But you just said something interesting, is that they need to go through, they have to learn about the values. And then you said this, you said, and have a conversation with their manager and make sure that it sunk in. And you know what I just realized? I don't do that. I basically just go, any questions, right? And I really should be digging deeper and going, well, what stuck out for you? Was there anything that you have questions about? What did you like the most? What do you think we could I should be asking more engaging questions after I bring somebody on, not just, oh, well, yep, the software says they completed it. I'm done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, of course, now I should explain Air Manual. So Air Manual is a tool for documenting processes and onboarding as interactive checklists. And we created it after experiencing that there wasn't really a tool out there that was able to provide us with a really user-friendly way of providing processes and checklist and onboarding someone to our team members. But particularly it wasn't user-friendly because it wasn't fast. Lots of tools out there, they exist, but it's a bit slow. And partly because they're tools that are designed for training primarily. And so they assume that each part has got a lot of content. And so it's fine when you click next if it takes like 5 seconds or 10 seconds for the page to load. But when you've got an interactive checklist that might be send an invoice and the first step is open 0, And then next step is, go to the invoices page. You don't want 5 to 10 seconds page load between each of those things. So we want something that's really fast. Yeah, exactly. And people just stop using it.
They just want you like, oh, it's too slow.
Exactly. And then as the business leader, you're like, oh, but you sent this invoice out and you hadn't updated this information. Why'd you do that? It's in the process. Oh, I didn't use the process. I did it from memory. Oh, okay. Right. Great. Well, that took us 2 hours to fix later. So we wanted a tool that's really fast to use, but we also wanted, because a big one of our 4 core values is always look to improve. And so a big part of it was, how do you help the team to improve the processes around them? And so what we did was create a tool that actually it's really easy for people to click edit, make a change, publish, and as a result, it's updated all the interactive checklists that are related to that particular process. So
interesting.
What
Liz,
yeah, sure.
I want to point something out, by the way, because you know what I found? First off, before we started the recording, we talked about how most business owners just don't have SOPs. They don't have policies and procedures, right? And I think this is interesting. This is kind of, we could probably go back to one of those old-fashioned story about the guy cutting the ends of the roast off in the pan, blah, 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 all that cliche stuff. But I'm wondering how much of the resistance to SOPs goes back to the fact that, frankly, like my belief, I've got a planner and it's old fashioned, right? Because I find that planning systems digitally suck. Yep. They're horrible. There's no consequence. They just automatically roll things over. When you have to physically roll the things over the next day, you're a lot more aware of taking on too many things. This is one of those things where I think physical manuals suck. And they've always sucked. And they've always been, first off, because where's the manual? You don't know where you if you're off in the production floor, you can't walk back and get the manual, right? So it's always a pain in the butt. And then you got to reprint them. And then if you have a company where you have multiple manuals, it's always been horrible. And so I think there's always been a resistance. But now because of technology and things like Air Manual, one quick change, update, everybody gets an email going, hey, here's a policy change update. Please go read it. And it's much, much more efficient. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, the ability to search, for example. So creating, and back to culture, like creating that culture where there is an understanding and expectation that when an employee doesn't know how to do something, they don't go, oh, let me go disrupt another team member who's like in the middle of this difficult problem, or let me just go call the business owner, or even just like, oh, let me just work it out myself. Instead, they know that they can just go in and search for like send invoice or invoice, and then they can see, oh, here's a series of processes, have chase an invoice, send an invoice, credit a note an invoice, and they go, right, that one, and click on it and follow the process. And if you create that culture, regardless of what tool you use and whether you use a paper one or whatever, creating a culture which is that we don't reinvent the wheel. We try and learn from what we've done in the past. As a result, that means documenting what we do in the best possible way, following it wherever it exists, and then continuously improving it. I think if you create a culture like that, it means that you avoid that risk that I think that hole that some companies fall into, where every year becomes the same. They risk getting to stagnation, particularly in terms of just how they do things. And then years later, they look back and say, oh yeah, we need a massive overhaul to all of our processes because we've not improved as we've gone along, or worse, people do improve things, but nothing ever gets documented. And then that person leaves and all that knowledge goes out the door. And suddenly as a business leader, you're having to wade back in and train people up in things that have now significantly changed from your documentation. So
it's funny how many times you'll hear business owners go, it's just faster for me to do it myself, or I don't have time to write an SOP. And I'm just like, it's funny, I was having this conversation the other day about how there's a book by Mike McCallowich called Clockwork. Great book, by the way. I think you'd love it. And one of the things he says is just freaking break out your phone and record whatever you do. Have it set up on a little tripod, and it sucks and it's unofficial, but that is better than nothing, right? And then you can hand it over to somebody.
I agree. And it is absolutely better than nothing. However, and I'm sorry, Mike, because I do love Mike, and I love his books, like Profit First and Clockwork and so on. And exactly as you say, Topher, it's better than nothing. The problem with recording,
it still sucks.
So the problem with doing it on video, because it's a popular thing, is that of course, when the person then wants to improve it or they ask a question, how do they do that? Do they now have to edit the video, re-record it? And if they can't remember something, they have to then scrub back in the video and try and find the particular point. takes so much time. Plus, of course, when doing it on video, you're not doing it the perfect way. You're not thinking about the right order. You're just like going through it and you meander, and so it takes so much longer. Whereas when you can just quickly create a document and go, what's the objective I'm trying to achieve? So it's like, I want to send an invoice to a customer. Great. What's the context? Well, when a customer makes an order from us, we need to send them an invoice, but we need to make sure it's coded correctly so it shows up in the accounts correctly. Done. Okay, what are the key steps? 1, open Xero. 2, create a new invoice. 3, enter the customer details. 4, enter the product details. 5, approve it. 6, send it. 7, add it to our other spreadsheet out of Xero, whatever other things that you've got to do as part of that process. And if you start really high level, you can then just add detail where needed. So you can see that doing that is quicker than recording and doing all of those things. But also,
By the way,
then realize there's another step. I can just
clarify. I meant just record it and then hand it to somebody to transcribe it. It's a horrible system. But by the way, I was going to ask you about something, and now I've distracted myself. Keep going.
Cool. But what I will do is share one thing that we learned over the last year was that, as you say, like business owners, I think most business owners get that they need to create processes. They do need to document things. They want to systemize. They want to reduce the chaos. They want to free up their own time. They want to empower their teams. They get that. And then, as you say, they kind of go, oh, but it'll take me too much time. And so what was interesting, and so when we started showing other business owners Air Manual, they're like, oh, wow, this is amazing. This is so fast. I can see it. Set me up with an account. And we would. And we go, brilliant. They're going to be a customer, right? 2 weeks later, they've done nothing, right? Nothing. And of course, the reality is because we all self-sabotage in this way because we don't invest that time up front to then get the value. And what we found and what we discovered is that what we needed to do, or what added the most value, was actually a bit of done with you kind of service. So it's really funny because I actually 10 years ago started building software businesses so that I wasn't doing consulting and wasn't building a consulting business. And now 10 years later, I'm finding that I'm basically building a consulting business off the back of software. So it's kind of gone full circle. But anyway, so as a result, on these calls with these business owners, we're taking them through a process going a bit meta, but a process to document their processes and so on and hand them over to people. But the amazing thing is we had some people who would tell us that like, oh, I know I need to document this, but, and it'll probably take me about 8 hours. I just haven't found the time. And then in 45 minutes would get it all documented and handed over to a team member and save them like 2-3 hours per day, like going forwards. And so the return on investment of that time is just ridiculous. It's so powerful. And of course, over time, it just builds up because, I remember,
it's a living document, right? You never get it done. It's always evolving because we're evolving in the business.
And it's
sure. I wanted to talk to you about something real quickly because I mentioned Trainual, by the way, been a customer of them for years. Love them. We talked about Air Manual, but I'd love to do a side-by-side comparison. Like, what's the difference, right? Because listen, I got no problem with Trainual, but you're right. It is not good for a checklist. And I find that there are certain things, especially in my broadcast studio now, that we really need to be checklist driven because you can't, it's like a flight list on a plane, right? No matter how many times you've done or how good you are, that one day you screw up, all of a sudden the client's left and we've got an hour and a half of footage that we forgot to hit the record button on or something like that. And I love checklists, but Trainual's not that good with that. What are some of the comparisons or some differences?
So that's one of the things that we started with, I guess. And I think it's because the fundamental difference was that when we've onboarded people into our organization, we've always, rather than just say, oh, we're going to train them and then hope they remember it and then they'll do it great. Instead, I think even for ourselves, like back when I was doing like all the financial accounts and so on for the businesses, and fortunately now I've passed that to finance administrator, it was so easy for me to forget stuff. So we needed detailed checklists so that when I'm doing the month end or I'm doing the quarterly VAT or the annual year end or whatever, like I wanted it all detailed because otherwise either I'd forget something or more likely I'd just spend ages trying to think, okay, what was the thing? What have I forgotten? And so on. But the power and the reason we built it this way is that then when you then bring in my case, like a finance administrator, the great thing is you just give them the checklists and then you say, okay, you follow this and maybe I shadow and ask me any questions. If they have any questions, I just make the change. And I think it's because we started there, it gave us an advantage that then when we started to kind of build out other types of checklists that perhaps are more training focused and so on, it means that there's much more flow between them. It means that you're not having to go out to another system or whatever. It's all in one place. And partly because we had experienced it using other tools like Trainial and Process Street and other tools that are out there, which 5 years ago, 10 years ago, in fact 10 years ago didn't exist, but 5 years ago existed. But they came from a different place. And we're fortunate to have a software team, and I'm fortunate enough to have a co-founder who's absolutely hot on really easy to use, fast system design, which is what we did at SpiderGap, and we've brought some of those strengths over to Air Manual to then do that. So that's kind of why we've done that. So I think for other business owners, when you're adding other products or when you're looking at perhaps competitors and thinking, how do we position against that? My advice is firstly, look at the things that you're super strong at and are really aligned to your values. And then secondly, just go speak to customers, go speak to the people who are using those tools. And if possible, become a user yourself and really experience the pain so that you can say, okay, yeah, I can see where we fit. And ideally, the more you can identify something that not only is an improvement upon others, but almost strategically is not in their interest to go in that direction. I always think that's a really smart move. Because otherwise, if you just do a feature that they could add, like if they go, oh yeah, well we'll just add that, then that's difficult. Whereas if you create something in your tool or your product, which actually the competitor has no interest in doing, like making it more simple. For a lot of companies, they've spent years adding more and more features. Why would they then want to hide away all of those things? So of course, that's it's one way in which strategically you can position yourself as a better alternative to a competitor without them even wanting to change to what you do. So
Yeah. By the way, we should probably, because we're talking about Air Manual, we should probably talk about how people can access Air Manual and check it out, because and also SpiderGap as well. So the best way for people to find out about Air Manual is go to airmanual.co, airmanual.co. And if they want to learn more about SpiderGap, which we really haven't even talked about, which I love, which is your 360-degree feedback tool, that is spidergap.com, spidergap.com for SpiderGap, airmanual.co for Air Manual, correct?
That's correct. Thank you, Topher.
Yeah, check it out. Yeah. By the way, what's coming up for Air Manual? Like, one of the things that I noticed Trainial was lacking was the ability to get like SOC 2 certification in the States for software development. They have security issues. How are you guys with those types of things? Is that maybe the next iteration that you're going for? Or do you already have SOC 2 compliance capabilities, or where are you guys at with that?
Yeah, so so again, one of those great benefits of having had another product and then moving to this is that we had to get all of that kind of stuff in place, for GDPR and so on, for SpiderGap. And so that it's been a relatively gentle learning curve and switch for us to do that for Air Manual. So, for example, even doing penetration testing, where you basically pay to have ethical hackers try and get into your systems, we've just completed that for both SpiderGap and Air Manual, which is the kind of thing that most small software businesses wouldn't do. I mean, frankly, some ever, but certainly most for a long time. But because that's a background that we've come from, it's something that we're really hot on. So that's something that's on the security side. We're already in place with that. We're already being used by some larger organizations like Sony and Thomas Cook and so on. So it was something that we just had to have in place. So that's that we're hot on. But I think the big thing for me in terms of what we're doing next, and I encourage people to link in with me on this, is on social. Like with SpiderGap, the nature of the target audience and the way in which the product was sold and so on, we didn't kind of go big on social media and getting out there with content. I think with Air Manual, the big thing that we can help business owners with is not just the tool, it's the how. It's the how do you get to a point where you're able to onboard members of staff. Like in November, I onboarded some sales consultants into my team. And in 7 days, they get completely up to scratch so that they can do demo calls and have proper discussions with customers, etc. And I spent 1.5 hours with them total over that period. Most people, when you hire someone, like you'd have to.
By the way,
yeah.
I want to talk about something because this is something I remembered about you from last year's mastermind at Dan Bradbury's Success Mastermind, which is coming up June 21st and 22nd, by the way, for those of you listening or watching. I remember hearing an astounding number of applications that you go through before you hire a developer.
Yeah.
And it blew my brain away because I understand the importance of deal flow, right? Most people, when they're hiring somebody, they post on Indeed or Monster or whatever it is. They get 5 or 6 applicants. They call 3. They book the appointments. One shows up late. The other one shows up drunk. The other one didn't show up at all. So they just hired the late one because it didn't have much out there as well. And I remember Dan looked at you because he was aware of the number. Share with the people that are listening or watching this podcast, how many applications do you take before you hire one developer?
Yeah, so when hiring developers, which typically it's that we find is the role that's perhaps the hardest to get really like top quality candidates and so on, we'll look for about 2,000 applicants that we will filter down. And so we have a multi-stage process to kind of do that, and with checklists and so on. That means that I've been able to train other team members to be able to conduct the interviews or review the applications. The very first application stage only takes 20 seconds for us to review. So many people are reviewing like CVs as part of the recruitment process, and I just think that's a complete waste of time. It's
I would assume if you're going through that much deal flow, by the way, you got to have a relatively low turnover rate. Turnover in America isn't money. It's how many people churning through your company. Yeah. Do you have what's your turnover rate, or do you have those stats available? Is it pretty low? I would assume it's quite low.
It's really low. So it's one of those things where, because of size of company and length of stay, it means that I kind of don't have. I'm not like the people. It grows every day because people just keep on staying. It reminds me, there's that quote, something like, train people so that they could leave, but treat them so well that they wouldn't want to.
They would want to stay. I think it was Richard Branson said that.
And I think that's been something that I've definitely subscribed to. I think we work very hard and have processes and guidance, and in fact within Air Manual we've got some of the exact checklists that we use for having development conversations with employees are available as like templates. But we're really big on that, because I think that both for a benefit for me as a business leader in terms of growing my team, but also one of the most rewarding things I have experienced as a business leader is seeing the development of people, and often seeing them develop beyond what they even thought they were capable of. We do that so that they are continually developing and taking on more responsibility and creating their own processes and taking on more and so on, so that they're doing these amazing things. And, we make sure that we create a culture of people who are really lovely to work with, super smart. And that means that you have to get really good deal flow to do so. But as a result, no, we rarely, we've not had bad leavers, so we're in really good terms with everyone that's left in the organization to date. And we've certainly got people, the few people that have left, we catch up with regularly, and often they tell us how much nicer it was at where they were, which is fine.
Hey, there's some benefits. Sometimes they go over, see the grass ain't greener, and they come back with
and a couple of referrals and everything.
Alexis, dude, I could stay on this call for hours with you, because I find you to be a fascinating individual with a great brain that understands how to think 4, 5, 6 steps ahead of most business owners. I find it fascinating. Yeah, well, there we go. For those of you who are watching or listening to this, you can actually meet Alexis. He's going to be a finalist this year at the Ultimate Entrepreneur Competition at Dan Bradbury's Success Mastermind, coming up June 21st and 22nd. You will be on stage competing for other people to win a check for $10K. Great luck with that, by the way. I wish you the best of luck, Alexis. For those of you who want to learn more about what he does and his companies, you can go to spidergap.com, and you can go to airmanual.co. To learn about the 2 softwares that he is known for. But you can also just connect with him on social media. His name is Alexis Kingsbury. Just probably Google Alexis Kingsbury, and there's probably not going to be that many of them there. You can probably find that handsome face and click friend request. Make sure you give him a little quick note. We heard you on the Dan Bradbury podcast, so he knows where you came from. And Alexis, I'm just stoked to get to reconnect with you again in June. We're going to have a lot of fun at the Ultimate Entrepreneur Competition inside Dan Bradbury's Success Mastermind. Alexis Kingsbury, thank you for contributing and great ideas and concepts. I like I said, I could talk to you all day.
Thank you so much, Topher. It's been great talking to you.
There you have it, Alexis Kingsbury. If you'd like to meet Alexis, he's going to be competing in the Ultimate Entrepreneur Competition coming up June 21st and 22nd in Warwick. That is a competition which is inside the Dan Bradbury Success Mastermind. Now, if it's not enough to come just for the competition alone, let me tell you, we got two special guests coming in that program. We have Nigel Shanahan and Simon Inchley. Nigel grew a business, successfully exited it for over $50 million. You're going to want to learn out how he did that, and he'll be there to share with you how he scaled his company and had a successful exit. And then Nigel is the founder of Gresham LLC, which is a private equity firm. At the time, they were responsible for over $750 million in assets, and he successfully grew that and exited for over $100 million. So you are going to want to sharpen your pencils and take lots of notes at the Dan Bradbury Success Mastermind, June 21st and 22nd. Until then, let's all try a little harder to be a little better. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. 3 things you need to do now. Number 1, make sure you subscribe to this podcast so you do not miss an episode. Also, get on over to Amazon to get a copy of my latest book, Turnover is Vanity, Profit is Sanity, 9.5 Steps to Improving Your Profits and Cash Flow. Also, join our Facebook group, the Turnover is Vanity, Profit is Sanity community, to connect with other business owners.